I see it. It's recording.
It's recording. Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. This is the second installment of my little interview, I guess, podcast kind of thing called Drinking with Authors. And today we are going to be talking with Stephen Leigh about his newest book called Amid the Crowd of Stars. Okay,
Yay!
there's Stephen Leigh. Okay, so it's a science fiction book. But there's some fantasy connections there that we'll get to here shortly during the interview. And because it's called Amid the Crowd of Stars, I'm wearing my little star t-shirt here. Get in the mood, so to speak. Okay, so the idea behind Drinking with Authors is that we're going to talk about their book. We're all drinking something. And so let's start with what Stephen Leigh is drinking tonight.
I am drinking tonight. Where'd it go? There it is. I'll never be a product person. Connemara single malt peated whiskey, Irish whiskey. It's the only peated Irish single malt. Usually Irish whiskey is not peated. The Scotch is always peated. And I love really, really heavy peat in Scotch. Like that's why I like the Isla stuff like what is it called? Ardbeg, Lafroig, Lagavulin, really peaty whiskeys. You can smell the smoke. Yeah, but this one is peated. It's kind of just slightly peated. As I said, most of the Irishes are not, but this is made in Kilbeggan County, Ireland. So I like Irishes as well as Scotches. So
is this something? Is this something you picked up while you were in Ireland on one of your trips?
No, this is something I picked up. Well, I did try it in Ireland at first. The first time I tried it. But I've picked it up here. You can find it locally here.
Okay, interesting. Because I know you've been to Ireland, and that will probably factor into some of our conversations. Okay, so I'm drinking whiskey. It's not as fancy as your whiskey. It's basically Star Trek whiskey. It's like James T. Kirk straight bourbon whiskey, I think, is what it was. So. So not as fancy and probably not as good as yours.
Well, depends on whether it does the job or not.
Oh yeah, it certainly does the job. I've had enough of it to speak to that. Okay, so let's switch over to Amid the Crowd of Stars before we start slurring all our words. I finished the book last night, so I would highly recommend this book to everybody out there. So if you haven't already gone over and ordered it or haven't already bought it, go check it out. Like I said, it's a science fiction book, which is a little outside my purview. I don't read a lot of science fiction. I read quite a bit, but I read a ton more fantasy than I do science fiction. But it was a very good book. Everybody should go check it out. And what I'm going to do to start off with, because I don't want to spoil anything that you don't want me to spoil, I am going to hand it over to you, Stephen, and let you describe the concept for the book. And if you can, without giving anything away, tell us, why this is unique. Like what makes your book unique from all of the other science fiction books out there?
Well, I can tell you where it came from largely. Actually, the genesis of this is actually another Irish trip. I was in Ireland May of 2017 with my sister, and we were visiting some relatives over there. And we went to a place we'd never been before, the Dingle Peninsula, which is to the west of Ireland and toward the south. And we were exploring around there and became aware that of the Blasket Islands, which are off at the end of that particular peninsula. The Blasket Islands I found fascinating. If you wanted to learn Irish back in the 19th, early 20th century, the Blaskets is where you went because they spoke Irish there. They did not really speak English. And the Blasket Islands are just a little chain of islands, an archipelago of islands, and they're kind of cut off from the mainland of Ireland. And there was tension between the two. And I love cultural conflict. That's what gets me going, as far as, especially for writing. Um, so they were also a really literary place. A lot of the Blasket Islanders um, wrote books. In fact, I read several of. I bought and read several of them after we were there. Um, but of course, because of the march of technology, fishing technology, especially because these were all fisher folk, and lots of regulations and that, and the lure of going elsewhere, like to America, as was the case with a lot of people in Ireland. Uh, the residents were slowly leaving the Blaskets until there were too few of them left, really, to sustain anything there. And the government of Ireland basically uh, got everybody out of there. In when was it? 1953. They closed down the island. You can still go visit the ruins of the village there on Great Blasket. And you can still get to the Blaskets. And there's this Blasket Center out on the Dingle Peninsula, which is just fascinating. It's got all sorts of stuff about the Blaskets. So I became really fascinated with it, and some ideas started percolating. Um, and I think you probably know this as a novelist yourself, is ideas don't generally just come from one place. They come from several different places. So not long after that, when I got back at some point, I was watching the old movie. Uh, why am I blanking on it? I'm blanking on the movie.
Planet?
Uh,
Is it Forbidden Planet?
Forbidden Planet. Thank you. Thank you. So I was watching that, and one of the things that I've noted often in science fiction movies, which always makes me just kind of shake my head, is the intrepid space travelers will go on a planet. They'll check for the atmosphere and see it's breathable, and they just go whoop, and start breathing in the atmosphere. It's usually breathing in the biota and the viruses and the bacteria and everything else that's there, and they're breathing out everything we have. This is not a good way to go about exploring. In fact, it's a really dangerous way for us, and it's actually a really dangerous way if there's anybody there where we're going. And I've seen that so many times, and it just has always bothered me. So uh, that was another tick on in the box for the this particular novel.
Yeah, I one of the things I say at conventions a lot is that for me the I don't have a novel or a short story until I have like three things, and so I have to have three things kind of click together, and then I feel like I have a story.
Yeah, I generally have to have two or three or four things click, and in fact, I find that I do more reading of nonfiction anymore than fiction, just because I'm kind of mining for ideas, waiting for something to kind of strike me and to go, oh, I like that. I can use that somewhere. So
yeah. Well, yeah, you've always got, as a writer, you've always got your ear out for anything that sounds cool and interesting that can be used like that. But it's interesting to hear about these islands off of the coast of Ireland, because I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but you basically have a very similar setup in the book, Amid the Crowd of Stars. So how did these islands end up influencing the story in your book?
Again, it's the conflict between the mainland of Ireland, which was largely English speaking. They were English speaking rather than Irish speaking, but they were also much more technological than the islands, which were still doing the things the way things had been done for centuries. Um, as I said, the islanders were fisher folk, and that's how they made their living, is they fished and brought the fish back to the mainland and sold the fish, uh, ate the fish, of course, too. But there really wasn't much there that they could use. So that there was a lot of back and forth between Dingle, which is the largest town on the Dingle Peninsula, and the Blaskets. So I have the same setup basically in Amid the Crowd of Stars with Dulcia, which is a town there, and the islands out on the out in the sea, which is the analog for the Blaskets.
All of this is set on another planet, right?
Yes, this is set on Canis Lupus, which is part of what is the actual star? It's a red dwarf. I actually use this. I had at school. Where I no longer am, there was a good friend of ours. Actually, he's the husband of one of my creative writing colleagues. Nathan DeLeigh is a astronomy professor at NKU, and he helped me with some of the initial world building there. I was looking up stars that appeared to have to be in the habitable zone, and were relatively close by, and I came up with Wolf 1061c, C being the third planet, and so I had set the story on Wolf 161c, and I talked to Nathan about this. Nathan, by the way, is part of the people who are helping with the transiting I have to look at what it is, the transiting exoplanet survey satellite TESS. So he's actually working to choose the stars that TESS will be looking at. And so I talked to him about Wolf, and he's Wolf and the third planet there, and he said he wasn't certain that this was a good world, but I persisted anyway. He said, because it goes around Wolf really, really, really fast. And he says the chances are, and they don't know, but the chances are that it's locked orbitally or tidally to the planets, so that much like our moon, it presents the same face to the planet all the time, which means that any habitable zone on this, the sunward side would be hot and the starward side would be cold, and there'd be a habitable zone kind of girdling the planet, which is what I set up for that particular setup. So
yeah,
Nathan's not sure about that, but I persisted.
Well, that's one of the advantages of being a writer, is you can say, well, we know, or we're suspicious that it's not this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Right. I like it. I like the idea of a tidally locked planet with just this girdling habitable zone. That could be fun.
Exactly.
That's a third thing.
It's my book, damn it. I'm going to do what I want.
But Nathan helped. I mean, I'm grateful to Nathan for all the astronomical advice he gave me. And so any mistakes in astronomy are not Nathan's, they're mine.
Yeah, I having read the book, I can see that correlation between the Blasket Islands. I think that's what they were, right? Blasket.
Right.
The Blasket Islands and the setup that you have in the book Amid the Crowd of Stars. Again, don't give away too much from the book, but what do you think is like like unique? Anything in particular that you think is unique about your book? Just this setup, or is there anything else?
Well, I like, again, I'm fascinated by cultural conflict. Um, and that's what I was going for in this particular book. As I said, with the Blaskets, there was the cultural conflict between the Blaskets and the mainland, between the Irish and the English, as well. For amid the crowd of stars, there's that set up still, because we have the island and we have the mainland. But then there's other cultural conflicts. We left, we brought people here to that particular planet and set up a base for them where they were protected from the environment. And then there was a problem back on Earth where the ship had to leave, saying they'd be back. They didn't come back for 3 centuries. And of course, everything broke down in that time frame. So the people that were left behind, the settlers from Earth, didn't have much choice. They had to expose themselves to this particular planet, and many of them died as a result, because diseases of that sort, and from the planet, and but some survived, and became used to it or developed some immunity to the diseases there, and they had to figure out, what can they eat, what animals can they use, and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's this cultural conflict between the people who have now come back from Earth, and these people who were left there, who essentially, to my mind, are no longer Homo sapiens. They're Homo lupus. And some of them want to go back to Earth. The question becomes, and here's the cultural conflict, the question becomes, can they do that? Can we safely take them back to Earth, or will they spread these diseases from Canis lupus on Earth if we did that? So we have to kind of figure out whether we can do that or not. And I won't say much more than that.
Well, that's the people from Earth that have just arrived. That's essentially right. Their main purpose for being there, right, is to see if they can actually bring them back, or one of
right.
their purposes.
Right. They've come there to see, is anybody left? And if they are, and because they do find that people have survived there, they have to decide, well, can we take them back? Can we not take them back? Do we have to leave them here? What do we have to do? And of course, the people who have just come from Earth here, keep themselves isolated from the planet. They either stay in the ship that's orbiting, or they wear suits that keep out the environment when they're on the planet. Cultural conflicts.
Yeah, and
that's what I'm a lot more interested in.
And then, of course, the people on the planet are holding sort of a cultural grudge that has been passed down through the centuries because they feel like they were abandoned. So
oh yeah,
they've got that issue as well from the people on the planet. So yeah, there were certainly a lot of cultural clashes going on here in the book, and we touched on some of them. So
not all of them yet.
Not all of them, no, because that would be spoilery. But one of the things that I found interesting that I actually knew about before I started reading the book, because you did some kind of post on Facebook or social media somewhere and mentioned
it was on Facebook, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, is that your initial concept for the book was not a science fiction book; it was actually a fantasy book. So Can you talk about why it initially was fantasy and then how it got switched into sci-fi along the way?
Well, I was teaching during that semester, I was teaching a science fiction and fantasy course for creative writing. And basically I used them as my class. I used my class as a experiment. So what I gave them was the proposal I did for the fantasy novel, um, which was basically, it was an alternate world.
Okay.
Where it was an alternate world where magic works. It was kind of steampunkish because it was kind of Victorian in setting, and some historical characters played parts in at least in my proposal. Some played parts. You know, we had dirigibles. So and there were, the setup for that was that there were portions of the world where simply technology would not work. That if you came to any of these places, anything technological, anything more advanced than hand stuff like, you know, fishing rods and shovels and that kind of thing, but anything electrical or anything that had any technology involved just would stop working. Why? Nobody knows. But that was the setup for that. And I actually started writing that. I probably got about, I would say about 15, 20,000 words, 4 or 5 chapters into that. Before I decided, I don't really like this. It wasn't working for me for some reason. And I thought, I still want to do this basic thing. So I turned it into a science fictional setting, and all of a sudden it all kind of collapsed together for me, or came together for me. But I let my students give me feedback on the fantasy proposal and feedback on the science fiction proposal, and which one do you like best and why. And they pretty much, the majority opinion was they liked the science fiction version better, and I did too, honestly. So what I sent both of them to Sheila and said, okay, my preference is this, but I could still do the other one if you're interested in that. And Sheila said, no, I like that too. So
yeah, just thinking about the two, like the concept that you just explained, the fantasy concept versus the sci-fi one that I just read, I would have said the sci-fi one was the more interesting one. And I mean, it's kind of just more realistic, more believable, I guess. For me, that's why I would lean in that direction. But I think it's funny that you said you had written like 4 or 5 chapters and it just wasn't working for you, because I got invited to do a short story for an anthology, and I sat down 2 weeks ago to write the short story, and I got 3 days into writing it, and I was just like, this is just not working.
I've been there several times.
So I had to trash everything and start over again, you know, twisting the idea, changing the idea up a little bit, and now it's working. So
yeah, my worst one on that one, it was the novel Immortal Muse, which I loved the concept, but as I was working it, I realized some of it just didn't make. I ended up tossing 45,000 words of that out of the first draft because it just didn't make any sense, and had to backfill.
Yeah, and you know it while you're writing it, or at least I do. Like you get this sense that just things aren't right, and you can't figure. Usually, it takes you a while to figure out what it is that is not working for you. So, you know, hopefully it only takes 5,000 words, but worst case scenario, 45,000 words. But
what can I say? I'm a slow learner.
no, it's certainly taken me a lot longer than a couple thousand words before I figured out something working.
But you're right. You're right in that you can tell, you kind of know as you're writing that this just isn't working, and you're kind of hoping, well, if I just keep pushing a little bit forward, it's going to turn and it'll start working.
Something will click and it will start.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
it's okay if I have to go back and fix it.
Exactly, because you're like, oh, I can fix this in revisions and stuff. But there is a point where, or at least for me, there is a point where it just hits this wall, and you're just like, no, it's not going to fix itself, and I'm going to have to trash it and start over again, which is horrible because you're losing days of writing.
Days and days and days, yes.
Yeah, and but it's also what needs to be done. I think while you're writing, you're trying to figure out what it is that's going wrong, and so you just keep writing because you're like, it's better to keep writing than it is to stop.
Right.
If you don't know what to fix yet. So.
Well, and I suspect you had this too, which is sometimes you do break through, and sometimes it does start to click, and you find that, okay, I'll have to go back and I'll have to toss some stuff back there, but revision, I can fix all this.
Yes, that's happened. I mean, I've had things where I've gone back and just said, okay, if I chop off the first 3 chapters, then that's where it started clicking, and so chop off the first 3 chapters and lose that, and then everything after that works. So not necessarily revising where it wasn't working. It was just you were trying to figure it out in your head. So we're kind of drifting into talking about writing a little bit, but let's do a couple quick things before we start talking more about writing in general. So one of the questions I had was the book has interesting chapter titles. So I wanted to know where the chapter titles were coming from. Did we lose you?
Well, the Yeats poetry. I love Yeats' poetry. What's that? Did you lose me there?
Yeah, I lost you there for a second. So start over again.
The chapter titles largely came from William Butler Yeats, and a lot of them are quotations or sort of quotations from Yeats's poetry, which I happen to love. And a lot was because also, as I was starting to write this book, another colleague of mine who also is an Irish lover took a group of students over to Ireland, and it was a creative writing kind of expedition. So I was reading Yeats and just was going, oh, some of these quotes are just too good. So I borrowed some of them. I mean, probably a third of the quotes are actually mine, and 2/3 of the quotes of the chapter titles are mine, and 2/3 are Yeats. If you Google the chapter titles, a lot of times it'll pop the line of poetry. But I just love his poetry, his choice of words, the images he can come up with. So Amid the Crowd of Stars, actually, the title is from a Yeats poem, which is the line there is actually amid a crowd of stars, but I like it better with the as the article rather than as the article. So I changed it. Sorry, William.
So for the chapter titles that were not from Yeats, were you trying to emulate Yeats? Were you trying to work your inner Yeats out?
I would be a fool if I tried to do that. It's like you know, well, for instance, one of them is, as I'm looking actually at some of the chapter titles here. Um, what have I got? Legends and Routines. That's not Yates. That's just me. Uh, Separation and Anxiety. You know, separation anxiety, right? That's me. Coming Together and Apart. That's me. Um, see, The Consequences of Truth. That's me. So no, I did not try to emulate Yates because I knew I would fail miserably if I tried to do that.
Yeah, I am not a poet. I am a mathematician. So
I'm not a poet either. I'm a novelist.
yeah. Okay, then the other question I had, which I didn't prepare you for, was this is pretty much written as a standalone novel. So my question was, I mean, it's obvious that you wrote it as a standalone novel. But my experience with that is that I start with a standalone novel, and then after I've written it, all these other potential sequel ideas kind of pop up. So, so has that happened to you with this particular book? Do you have potential sequel
It hasn't
ideas?
yet. Never say never. I mean, I have committed trilogy before, a couple times. Especially I started writing for DAW back in 2000. In my first two books under S.L. Farrell, actually not Stephen Leigh, were both trilogies, fantasy trilogies. Um, and basically, can I take an aside here?
Yeah.
I'll get off the track here a little bit. I had been working with a different publishing house at that point, and I had this idea for a fantasy trilogy that I wanted to do, you know, a Celtic fantasy. And the editor there told me, well, you're a science fiction writer. You can't write under your own name because the fantasy readers will go, oh, it's Stephen Leigh. He's a science fiction writer. And the science fiction people will go, oh, he's writing a fantasy. I don't read fantasy. So her argument, which by the way, I did not buy at the time, but I stayed with it anyway, was that you have to change. I had to change my name. I had to write under a different name if I was going to go from writing science fiction, which is largely what I had written before, to writing fantasy. And so when my agent actually took that proposal and sent it out, and Sheila gave us a, you know, a nice yes, we'll take it. I stayed with that. I stayed with S.L. Farrell, even though I didn't necessarily want to do that, but I did because I thought, well, if she's right, my former editor, if she's right, then I've changed the name and I won't have any problem. And if she's wrong, it won't matter much. And then after I'd done the second trilogy for DAW, the Nasantico trilogy. Sheila, and I sent Sheila another proposal, and Sheila goes, do you want to write under your own name? And I went, yeah, I would like to do that. Well, let's do that then. So everything else has come out under Stephen Leigh. So
yeah, I noticed that. I wondered what the story was.
That's the story. What can I say? So it's been Stephen Leigh ever since. But yeah, I for that first trilogy, the Cloud Mages trilogy, let me get back on track here. In that particular setup, magic comes and goes in that world with really slow waves that take centuries or more to go through. So you have periods where there's no magic at all, and you have periods where magic works really well at the heights, and you have trowel, kind of a downslope and an upslope, moving toward either of those trowels or those heights. And I wanted to actually follow the first 3 books follow from the trowel up to a height. That's the first 3 books.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow the whole sequence. So I actually had in mind writing probably 16 books to get all of those in. But by the time I'd finished the 3rd book, I was going, I don't think I want to do this. I want to do something different. Because I was kind of tired of the world, honestly. And the thought of writing 3 more books, 6 more books, 9 more books in this world, I was just kind of going, nope, not going to happen. So I would never say never to, and actually, in a lot of ways, I prefer standalone books. What I really dislike myself when I'm reading is, and forgive me if you've done these, what I really dislike when I'm the reader is a trilogy where the first book just stops.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any conclusion. It just stops. And the second book picks up where that one left off, and then it stops. And then the 3rd book is taking up from where the second book left off, and it ends finally. So I tried to get around that by trying to make each book standalone as much as possible anyway. Like for the Cloud Mages, the protagonist of the first book is the mother of the protagonist of the second book, who is the mother of the 2 protagonists in the 3rd book.
Yeah.
Even though, they don't really have the same cast.
Yeah, that I don't do it. My books aren't quite that separated. But I also agree, I don't like, as a reader, I don't like reading a book where there's a cliffhanger ending at one of the, at the end of one of the books, or like you say, it just kind of, there's no resolution. It just kind of stops, and then you have to pick it up again.
Yeah, at least tie up one of the threads.
Yeah. So I always have, or at least I always try to do in all of my books, in my trilogies. Usually the first book is a pretty good standalone book all by itself. If you finish that first one, you can stop and never read again, and you'll be satisfied. Hopefully.
Oh, read them! They're good books.
Hopefully, though, you're intrigued enough that you want to go on and read book 2 and book 3 after that as well. But I try to make them. I try to make all of the individual books have their own solid resolutions at the very end of them. So I hopefully am not falling into that trap of what you don't like. So right now, there's no planned sequels for Amid the Crowd of Stars.
No, although there's a couple threads I could follow.
Yeah,
if I wanted to do that.
When I finished it, I was like, oh, I can see places where you can go with this.
Yeah, and I think with most of the standalone stuff, I could have gone on if I had wanted to. But by and large, like for Amid the Crowd of Stars, I trust that my readers are intelligent enough that they can make up their own mind about what happens based on what they have already read. What happens here?
This one pretty much tied up all of the threads. I mean, any of the threads that are left are minor threads. So if you were going to do a sequel, actually, like you said, with your other books, the sequel isn't going to necessarily involve the characters from this book. It's probably going to be its own separate standalone novel.
Yeah, I mean, the sequel, I would probably, I don't normally to this, the sequel I would probably do is to have, I'm trying to avoid spoiler alert from
no
the end.
Spoilers.
The sequel I would probably do is to have another ship come back from Earth to this world.
Yeah.
But of course, they would get there for years.
Centuries. Yeah.
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 So
well, I mean, you set it up that it would be what, a minimum of 14 years, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's
14 years to get there.
Years, but they use Canis Lupus uses a different timing system.
Yeah.
Because their year is about 16 days.
Yeah.
To go around so their years go by quick.
Yeah. For them, it would certainly be centuries.
Yes.
Okay, so let's switch over a little more to just some writing things in general. So how would you describe your writing style? Like, how do you plan out your books, or do you not plan out your books? Or, I mean, we talked a little bit about the idea that you sell the books on a proposal and stuff like that. So explain your writing style process. I lost you again. Okay, you're coming back.
Okay, are we back yet? There we go.
Yes. Okay.
I kind of lost you, but I think I know what you were saying. Yeah, I have been lucky enough since I've been with Daw, and after having sold them several books anyway, where what I generally do with Sheila Gilbert, who's my editor there, is I just give her a proposal. Here's what I'd like to write. Do you think that's a good idea? And she either says yes or no, depending. So I don't actually start writing a book, but I write up a fairly detailed proposal for the book. And for me, I'm well, you use the word pantser, and as I was saying when we were talking earlier before we started here, I'm with the Santa Fe group, George Martin's group of writers, because I work with George and a lot of writers there for the Wildcard series, but they use the term architects and and gardeners. I'm far closer to the gardener end of the spectrum than I am to the architect. Yeah, basically the two polar ends there. An architect can't start writing until they have plotted the whole novel out. They can't write until they do that. An architect just has to have an idea, and they'll start writing and see where it goes. Bradbury used to say, what I do is I set my characters in motion, and then I follow along behind them, writing down what they do.
Yeah, but you mean gardener. You said architect.
Oh, sorry. The architect has to have everything written down. Gardeners don't have to have anything planned out at all. They just plant the seed and see what it grows from it.
And I'm certainly the gardener.
Yeah, I'm far closer to a gardener than I am to the architect. I tried it once. I think it was like my third or fourth novel back in the dark ages when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. And I actually, and this will tell you how long ago it was, on index cards, 3x5 index cards, I wrote down every scene in the novel. And I had this big stack of index cards, and I thought, this is going to be a really easy one to write. All I have to do is write the scene that's on that index card, and then go to the next index card, right? Silly me. Because around about, I think the third chapter, maybe it was even the second chapter, I decided I needed to make a change. Yeah. And so this was supposed to go like two parallel lines, index card, my novel. But as soon as you make a change, everything goes away. By the time I got to chapter 4, and I'm looking at the index card, I couldn't possibly write that scene. It made no freaking sense. So all the index cards went away, and I just kept going from there.
From there, yeah.
And I never tried that again.
I have tried the outlining the plot and all that. Maybe not as detailed as, scene by scene or something like that. But my problem is that once I have it outlined, it's like my head thinks I've already written the story. and now I'm not interested in the story anymore.
I think that's the same thing I'd be going, well, I already wrote it. Why should I write it again?
Yeah, exactly. And so when I tried it, because I think everybody tries it, wherever you are in the spectrum, you always try the other option, I think, at some point. Yeah, I just wasn't interested when I sat down to really write it. I just wasn't interested in it anymore. It wasn't capturing my imagination at all. So I've pretty much stuck to the gardener or pantser model since then. And it sounds like mine's even worse than yours, that I'm farther along the gardener spectrum than you are, because I mean I'll send my idea proposal to Sheila, but mine is not usually horrendously detailed, and often when I sit down to start writing the book, that it diverges from whatever I sent Sheila pretty fast, and she kind of understands that that's going to happen. So
yeah, if you looked at the proposals I've sent to Sheila and she's accepted, and the novels I have written in response to those, they're not the same. And Sheila, yes, Sheila doesn't care as long as the novel's good when she gets it.
Yeah, she just wants a good book. And what I've discovered is that whatever I come up with while I'm writing is usually infinitely better than what I had in my proposal. So I think she's happy in the end.
Yeah, I think largely I tend to have a good idea of what I'm going to do in the first couple chapters when I start. I generally have a good idea, which is why I can, as I said with the fantasy proposal for Amid the Crowd of Stars, I got 3 or 4 chapters done.
Yeah.
And I usually have a fairly good idea of how I want to start. I have this vague idea of where I want it to end. And I have no clue what's in the middle.
Yep.
Not a clue.
That's exactly how I'm writing. Is that I have a couple ideas of things that happen along the way, but in general, I have no clue how I'm going to get there, and I just kind of start writing. So we should probably be winding this up. I think we're going on an hour here. What advice would you give to writers out there, and any particular advice that you have learned along the way after all of the trials and tribulations?
My basic advice would be, well, there's several pieces of advice, but I think the core one would be, if you're going to write, you got to write. I found that way back when I started writing, coming out of high school into college, I would wait for the muse to come and strike me over the head and deposit into my brain a fully formed short story, because that's all I was writing at that time, but a fully formed short story. And if I did that, if I waited for the muse to give me the story, or waited for my subconscious to give me the story, actually, I might write 1 or 2 stories a year. And I realized that if I was ever going to be a full-time writer or a constant writer, I needed to not do that. I needed to hit the muse over the head with a baseball bat and drag her over to the computer, or to the typewriter at that time, and say, okay, let's work. So I always try, and I've told this to my students many times, I try to write every single day without fail. I don't care what weekends, holidays, it doesn't matter. I try to write it. I usually try to write about 500 words, which is, roughly a page and a half of manuscript, I guess, which isn't that much. But actually, I think it was Mike Resnick told me at one point in time, because Resnick lived here in Cincinnati. He told me one time when we were talking about writing, he said, if you write just one lousy page a day, by the end of the year, you'd have written a novel.
Yeah.
Well, of course you have to revise it in that, but yeah. But you get the idea. So I've tried to do that. I try to make writing a lousy habit. It's kind of like exercise. I always ask my class, have any of you ever started exercising and then quit? And everybody raises their hand and says, yeah, I did that. Okay, you can't do that if you want to be a writer. You have to make it a habit, because that's what you have to do with exercise. Because if you take a week off of exercising, all of a sudden you kind of go, well, I'll wait another week. And then you realize it's been months since you've exercised. And then you feel bad and you don't feel like you can go back. So you got to write every day as much as possible. And I try to do that. I try to write 500 words a day. Sometimes I write less. There's occasional days where I don't write anything because I don't have things happen. But I sometimes also write 1,500 words a day. So make your writing a habit if you want to actually be a writer, because that's what writers do. They write.
Yeah.
I've known lots of people who want to have written as
Yes.
a
And I know lots of people that would like you to write the story that they want to write.
oh, surely you've never been asked that at a convention. I've got this great idea, and if you just write it, we could split the proceeds.
Exactly. But I want to agree with you, because when I basically hit college, and I had to ask myself, do I really want to do this writing seriously, or am I just doing it for kicks, as a hobby? And I said, I really want to do it seriously. And then at that time, I said to myself, if you really want to do it seriously, you've got to start doing it every day. And I literally,
We agree.
yeah, I literally sat down every day and forced myself. At that time, I wasn't worried about word count. I was saying, this hour, I will only write, only work on writing. And a lot of that hour was me staring off into space. But, but I was at the computer and I was trying to get words down on the page. Now, of course, it's not about the time. Now I'm shooting for word count. And so for me, I only write Monday through Friday, but I try to write 1,000 words a day. So, and like you said, some days I make it, some days I don't, some days I double it. It just kind of depends. But I've gotten in the habit of sitting down with the idea that I will be writing every day, just like exercise. I do the same thing for the exercise as well.
Good for you.
Yeah, at least I try. You are actually one of our standard writers for my Zombies Need Brains small press. So you've said, actually, in this interview, you sort of said that you're a novelist, but you're writing short stories for us for Zombies Need Brains. So is there any kind of difference between how you approach writing the novel versus how you approach writing the short story?
Yeah. In fact, there was a time where I didn't write any short stories, and then I started getting some invitations to anthologies from here and there, and I found, because I had started out writing short stories, and what happened was I was finding my short stories were getting longer and longer and longer, and I finally said, well, and it's hard to compress a novel into a short story. You really can't do that. That's actually one of the things that I had to figure out for myself, is you can't compress a novel into a short story. The short story is its whole thing, and it took me a while to actually figure out what I needed to do for a short story. But I love writing short stories. To me, they're a nice break from writing a novel. And I really enjoy the process. You have to, I think for me, it's a matter of finding the core of the story you want to tell, and getting rid of all the end stuff, getting rid of all the beginning stuff. Where's the core of what it is that you want to say, and just concentrating on that and writing that down. That's a short story. Um, and so for short stories, that's the tack I take is what is it I actually want to say here, and what's at the core there, and don't allow yourself to go wandering anywhere else.
Yeah, that's the short story I was talking about earlier, where I said I knew it was going wrong and I couldn't figure out why. That's what I figured out. Is I said, I'm treating this like a novel. I'm not treating it like a short story. So I was trying to pack in like all this world building stuff, and I realized all of a sudden I had, like 100 characters, and I had this, whole backstory and everything. And I was just like, no. This is a short story. You got to cut all of that out. And I did exactly what I said. I sat back and I said, what is the heart of the story? What is it that I really want to say in this story? And I cut all of that out and started over again. And I started right where that heart began. And that's when it started working.
Yeah, you got to me, in a short story, you got to figure out, you got to start as close to the end as you possibly can, and still have it make sense for the reader. And once you've reached the end, you got to stop.
Yeah. You can't keep going, which is where I'm at on this short story right now. I'm just like, okay, the big thing has happened. How much more do I need to make it feel, complete? And so hopefully I'll finish that in the next day or so. But yes, and hopefully we'll see you as a Zombies Need Brains author in the future.
I hope so.
Okay, I think we need to cut this off because I'm out of alcohol.
Am I actually?
So thank you for being here as part of our Drinking with Authors sort of interview podcast, whatever. I don't know what it's going to turn into. But everybody should run out and buy Amid the Crowd of Stars by Stephen Leigh. And hopefully we will see you in the future.
I hope so. This was fun. Thanks.
Yes.
I enjoyed it.
It was a lot of fun. Okay.
Take care. See you later, Joshua.
See ya.